Okay, welcome everyone. Great to see you here at Lindenwood University at the School of Business and Entrepreneurship. I'm Howard Wall. I'm the director of the John W. Hammond Institute for Free Enterprise. And if you hadn't been to Lindenwood in a while, probably saw some big changes, so we're glad you can come and see what's been happening here at Lindenwood and at the business school. Now, we're delighted to be hosting this event with the Show Me Institute, which has been very deeply involved in school reform in Missouri, especially with regard to school choice. And today we're going to be discussing tax credit scholarships as a possible remedy for giving students in Missouri greater opportunity to get out of failing school districts, or at least unaccredited school districts. Because as you probably are aware, there were some issues in schools in the St. Louis area of unaccredited school districts, and a 1993 law, I believe, allowing students to transfer out of unaccredited school districts. Now, I don't think any of our legislators who are here today were involved, but the law was, I guess we could say it was incomplete, in that it didn't really provide a mechanism or say how this was going to be done. So I think we have a good opportunity here to discuss a possible remedy and how to deal with the law and actually perhaps help students to get the education that they deserve. So I'd like to thank everyone. I'd like to also point out John Hammond, who is the benefactor of the Hammond Institute, and our legislators, and James will be introducing them later. And let me just give you a little bit of a preview of how the morning's going to go. The first section, we're going to have two speakers from states where these tax credit scholarships are already in place. One from Arizona, which is the oldest of these programs, so they've gone through quite a lot of changes, have quite a lot of experience, so it would be great to find out how they've done things and how it's worked for them. And then the opposite end, the newest operating program in New Hampshire, been going through some various steps in setting themselves up, and also we can get a lot of insights there. Now, after our two speakers, we're going to have a Q&A with the two speakers at the same time. So each one's going to speak, and then they'll sit down and they'll answer all your questions, because the Q&A is really the best part of any of these discussions, of course. And then we'll have a quick break, and then we have a survey of results on school choice for Missouri. So we have some very interesting results on what Missourians actually feel about these issues. And then we have a panel of our legislators, so you can grill them, whatever you want to do with them. Do we have free reign over them? Is that the agreement?
Close.
Close? How level? All right, so I'd like to introduce our first speaker. First speaker is Jason Bedrick. He is a policy analyst with Cato Institute's Center for Educational Freedom. And he's previously a legislator in the New Hampshire House of Representatives. Is that right? Don't look old enough to have done that. No offense to any of the legislators. And he was also a research fellow at the Josiah Bartlett Center for Public Policy, and has his master's in public policy from Harvard's Kennedy School. So we're delighted to have Jason to talk to us about what's been going on in New Hampshire, and also to give a bit of an idea about how these types of programs are structured. So, Jason.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to have some legislators in the audience today. As he mentioned, I served in the House myself, so I am a recovering legislator. The first step is admitting it. So I would like to talk to you about the program in New Hampshire, but first I wanted to give you a bit of an overview of what scholarship tax credit programs are. They're a form of market-based education reform. But really, there already is a market in education everywhere in this country, and it's called the housing market. Right now, if you want to go to a high-performing public school, you have to be able to afford probably a good home in usually a more expensive community. And so, because public schools accept students that are zoned in their district. So we have tied our education policy essentially to our housing policy. So what a school choice program does is it breaks the link between housing and education. So even if your parents can't afford to live in a more expensive district that has a better school, you would still have access to a higher quality education. So essentially the way it works now is this. Money is collected from taxpayers by the government, goes into the government treasury, and then it is distributed to public schools, district schools, and that's where most students go. So what we would like to do with the Scholarship Tax Credit Program is money is donated from taxpayers. In some states, it's from individual taxpayers. In others, it's from corporate taxpayers or both. And that money goes to nonprofit scholarship organizations. The taxpayer then receives a tax credit. In the programs that exist now, the tax credits range anywhere from 50% to 100% of the donation to the nonprofit scholarship organization. And then the money goes from scholarship organizations to families for them to use for educational purposes. Those of you who are laughing are betraying your age. So some quick facts about the New Hampshire program. First, the tax credit value in New Hampshire is 85%. New Hampshire doesn't have an income tax for individuals, so this is entirely through the corporate income tax. Recipients can earn, the families can earn up to 300% of the federal poverty line, which is roughly $70,000 for a family of 4. The maximum average scholarship is $2,500. The interesting thing about New Hampshire, it's the only scholarship tax credit program in the country that includes homeschoolers. So most programs only allow the money to cover tuition. In New Hampshire, homeschoolers can use use the scholarship funds for any number of educational expenses. So homeschool curriculum, online classes, tutoring, even if they wanted to take a class at the local public school. Students can also use the money at private schools, or they can use the money at out-of-district public schools. And in the first year, there was $3.4 million in credits available. And that will increase over time. Anytime 90% or more of the credits are utilized, in the following year, the cap expands by 25%. In terms of the actual students, though, we find that they are much more lower income than the program allows. 91% of the students participating in the program qualify or would qualify if they went to a public school for the federal school lunch program, which is 185% of the federal poverty line, or roughly $44,000 for a family of 4. We see here that actually 73% would qualify for a free lunch, which is 130% of the federal poverty line, or roughly $30,000 for a family of 4. So these really are truly the most disadvantaged students. These are not students who are coming from families. As often when we talk about school choice programs, people say, oh, it's really just to help rich people cover the tuition that they're already paying at a private school. That's not the case. Here we see that this program, even though they could have given money to families earning up to 300%, we see that most of them are actually much closer to the poverty line. And as a matter of fact, the majority said that they couldn't afford. 3/4 said that they would be unable to afford private school tuition without this program. And most of them did spend additional money above and beyond the program. Parents had skin in the game. There was only 4 that were going to private schools, 4 participants in the entire program. There was a very small program in the first year. I'll explain why toward the end. There were only about 100 participants in the program. So roughly 4% said that they didn't spend anything. Most spent more, about half spent up to $5,000, and then half spent more than that, above and beyond the scholarship. Now, in terms of, we did a survey. We had a 92% response rate of all of the participants in the program. One of the first questions we asked is, how hard is it to participate? If you have If it's a very complicated program and it's difficult to apply for the program, that's not going to be very useful for disadvantaged families. You want to have very low barrier to entry to the program. And fortunately, we found that overwhelmingly, they said that it was fairly easy to apply. About 75% said that it was easy to apply. We actually thought it would be more difficult for homeschoolers, and it was. About 20%, close to 20% of homeschoolers said that it was difficult. There, with the private school students, it's just one transfer. They're paying tuition. With the homeschoolers, they had to go through a whole series of, well, is this okay? Is this okay? Am I allowed to spend on this or that? Because it was the first year of the program. So a lot of those things had to be fleshed out. But even among homeschoolers, the majority said that actually it was fairly easy to participate in the program, which is encouraging. And then the question is, well, how did people find out about the program? If you have a program like this, but nobody knows that it exists, then that's a bit of a problem. And you see, it may be hard for people to see, government website, there was zero. I mean, the government actually did not promote this program at all. There was some opposition to it within the Department of Education, and so they decided they weren't going to lift a finger to help any students participate in this program. So among homeschoolers, we see that the majority found out through a friend or a family member. So word of mouth was very important. And unsurprisingly, for private school students, we find that the majority actually found out through a private school staff member. The second largest in both cases was the Network for Educational Opportunity, which is the only operating scholarship program in the state right now. They were doing their best to promote the program in the first year, and so a number of people found out through that, and then just a handful found out through either newspaper or radio coverage. The number one most important question that we had is, are parents satisfied with the school that they're sending their students to now? And we found that they were overwhelmingly satisfied. 97% said that they were satisfied with the school that they had chosen. And we see that actually even about 90% said that they were very satisfied with the school that they had chosen. Among those families who had previously had a student at a private school, at a public school, 100% said that they were more satisfied with the school that they had chosen than the school that they had left, which, I mean, obviously is not a very surprising result, but we do see that for whatever reason, their students were not satisfied at the school they were at before, and that they're much more satisfied when they actually have a choice. And that doesn't mean necessarily that all students were attending schools that were low-performing schools. Some states have adopted what are called this failing schools model. If you have a school, we have an A through F system, and we say that you have a D or an F school, everybody in that district gets choice. Well, the thing is, even at an A school, a school that's doing very well on standardized tests, you may just have some students that are not a good fit for that school. And so this sort of program is for that student as well, to find the school that better meets their needs. So we also asked parents if they noticed any academic improvement in their child since participating in the program. And so 2/3 of families said that they did notice measurable improvement. I think James Schulz has copies of the paper today. You can see we profiled the number of families who discuss their child's progress when moving from one school to another, and what exactly it was that was an issue in the first school, and what was better about the school that they were able to choose. And we see that more than 1/3 said that they strongly agreed with the statement that their child has had measurable improvement. So I mentioned before that the program was very small in the first year, and that's because it was very difficult to raise money when the program was facing a two-pronged assault. It had passed overwhelmingly in 2012, but there was a change in the legislature the following year, and it faced a repeal effort. So donors said, well, if I'm going to give you money now, and then you spend it, and then the program is repealed, I'm not going to get the credit maybe, and so why am I giving you this money if I don't know if the program is even going to exist in just a few months? So that made it very difficult to raise funds. The program actually was repealed in the House of Representatives, and then it was narrowly saved by just 2 votes in the Senate. So that uncertainty, fortunately, is gone. There's never been a school choice program that has been legislatively repealed, so we feel confident that the program is going to continue to exist going forward. At least it doesn't have any legislative threats. The other threat that it faced was from the state Supreme Court. There was a lawsuit almost immediately. In terms of the U.S. First Amendment, there is no problem with this program. The question is, can money go to religious schools? So a little over a decade ago in Zellman v. Simmons-Harris, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that as long as a program has a secular purpose, individuals can choose to send their children to private schools. As long as there are secular options as well, they can also choose to send their children to religious schools using public dollars. Then a few years ago in Arizona Christian School Tuition Organization versus WIN, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that in a scholarship tax credit program like this, since the money never enters the tax collector's hand, it is not actually public money at all. It remains private money. Just like a church could receive a tax exemption for its property taxes, 100% tax exemption, we don't then say that that church is publicly funded. Or people could make a donation to the church or to a religious school, and they would receive a tax deduction. And we don't then say, well, that deduction is then public money because the government could have collected it. No, we don't say that the church is publicly funded because of the deductions either. Likewise with the credits. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the credits remain private money. So again, the money goes from private individual taxpayers or corporate taxpayers to a private nonprofit to private citizens who are parents who can then use it at private schools and elsewhere. So it's not public money. The thing is, at the state level, there's something called the Blaine Amendment, which it's essentially the know-nothing movement at the end of the 1800s and in the early 1900s were very anti-Catholic. Now, at the time, public schools were de facto Protestant schools. The Bible was taught in a non-denominational Protestant manner that any Protestant would feel comfortable sending their kids and learning Bible in that manner. But of course, for Catholics, they did not feel comfortable sending their children to the public school. And so they said, look, you're funding the Protestant schools, you, the government, should also fund our Catholic schools. And so there was a movement to prevent that from happening. And so there was a senator from Maine, James Blaine, who sponsored an amendment to the U.S. Constitution that failed, that would have prevented money from going to parochial schools, but most states adopted it. And so then over time, public schools became secular, but money was forbidden from going to, any public money was forbidden to go to a religious school. Now, there are 14 states that have programs like this, and it hasn't been an issue. There was a lawsuit in Arizona, and the Arizona Supreme Court ruled that this is not public money, that there is no issue with that state's Blaine Amendment. The thing in New Hampshire is that New Hampshire has had some mixed precedent. There's very little precedent. Most of it is what's called an opinion of the court, which is non-binding. Because there was no lawsuit, so there are no adversaries, there were no two parties that were arguing each side. It was just the legislature asked the court for an opinion before considering or voting on some legislation, and the court issued a non-binding opinion that a property tax credit for personal use to go to a school that could possibly be a religious school would not be constitutional about 60 years ago. But the court, sort of tracking First Amendment jurisprudence, subsequently allowed a voucher program, which clearly used public money, to go for nursing. But that money could have been used at a religious school. There was also a period of time where they had sort of a state version of the Pell Grant, and of course you could use a Pell Grant or this scholarship at any higher education institution, whether it's religious or not. The court didn't make a distinction based on whether, again, going back to the nursing program, didn't make a distinction based on it being a professional program. They said that members of the public are not to be denied a public benefit solely based on their religion, so long as the program had a secular purpose and it was neutral with regard to religion, that any money that was used at a religious program arrived there indirectly. It was not a direct contribution from the state, and it arrived there in a manner that was entirely incidental to the choices of parents. So we feel confident that the court the New Hampshire State Supreme Court will find the program constitutional. The trial court ruled that the money could only go to non-religious schools. So in the first year of the program, students were not allowed to select a religious school. Going forward, though, we think that it is very likely that that is going to change. So I'll just summarize real quickly. The participants in the program are primarily the most disadvantaged in the state. They are generally unable to afford other options without scholarships. They're highly satisfied with their chosen schools, and they are witnessing measurable academic improvement in their children. Right. Thank you. And we'll take questions after Jonathan's presentation.
I'd like to introduce Jonathan Butcher, and he joins us from Goldwater Institute in Arizona, where he is the education director. And Jonathan has researched education policy for several years at both the national and state levels, and has served in education in South Carolina. He was the Director of Accountability for South Carolina, the South Carolina Public Charter School District, and has also done research with the Heritage Institute, or Heritage Foundation. So we're delighted to have Jonathan, and since, as I said, Arizona's program is the oldest one of these programs around. So thanks and welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you and good morning. My name is Jonathan Butcher, and I'm the Education Director at the Goldwater Institute, based in Phoenix, Arizona. And it's great to be with you this morning. The young man in the top corner of this slide up here is a gentleman named Gabe Alva Rivera. And Gabe grew up in Mexico. And some of his first memories, he told me when I met him a few years ago, were playing in the schoolyard with broken pieces of pottery and bricks, because that's all they had. And he also said that when he would be excused to go to the bathroom from class, he had to carry a bucket of water as his bathroom pass. Now, the bucket of water, of course, was to help flush the toilet. So when he and his family moved to Arizona, right about middle school age, he established himself as a very bright student and did very well in school, and applied to the Brophy Preparatory Academy through the Brophy Foundation, which helps students to, through Arizona's tax credit scholarship program, afford private school tuition. Gabe started the robotics program at Brophy and was featured by the local Microsoft store there in the Scottsdale Mall for his accomplishments in building robots and helping local middle school students with the same project. Turns out when he graduated, he was voted most likely to be locked in the robotics lab by his peers. And today, Gabe attends MIT, and even in his freshman year was given the chance to intern with a company that works with 3D printing. So this kind of rags to riches story is really what the programs in Arizona, and as Jason was describing around the country, are all about. And I'm going to describe some of the details of what is unique about Arizona's three tax credit scholarship programs, and how these programs are specifically designed to help those students who wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity to choose a school and find other opportunities. So Arizona, as was mentioned before, has the oldest individual scholarship tax credit program in the country. Now, with an individual tax credit scholarship, individuals and married couples contribute money to scholarship organizations, and then the individuals, the donors, receive a tax credit for their donations. In Arizona, it is a dollar-for-dollar tax credit for their contributions. These contributions are limited, they are capped at $1,000 for an individual, $2,000 for a married couple. an interesting item of note for Arizona's individual program. And one of the ways that Arizona has tried to make this program specific as a vehicle to help students that wouldn't otherwise have opportunities is that any contribution for an individual over $500 or for a married couple over $1,000, that money must be used for a child switching from a public school to a private school. Now, otherwise, in the individual program, it can be for any child in the state, even a child that's already attending a private school. Now, one of the things I'll explain, especially on the next slide, is how these scholarship organizations make their scholarship awards. So not only with the restrictions on the contributions and how that money needs to be used, in the individual program, it says in the law that the scholarship organizations must take into account a child's financial need or need for tuition assistance when making their awards. So the scholarship organizations in Arizona have the freedom and have the ability to construct their own eligibility requirements or award criteria for students that apply for the scholarships. So the second program in Arizona is a corporate program, and as you would guess, under the corporate scholarships, businesses, C Corps, contribute money to STOs, as they're called in Arizona, the scholarship organizations, and the businesses also receive a dollar-for-dollar tax credit. Now, this program, again, uniquely serves students who wouldn't otherwise be able to choose for a couple of reasons. So first, the students using scholarships under the corporate program must be students, again, switching from public school to private school, and they also must be students from disadvantaged backgrounds, from low-income families. They have to be families at a certain percentage of the poverty line. It's 185% actually of eligibility for the free and reduced price lunch program. So the third program, and this is the newest program in Arizona, is a program called Lexi's Law. Lexi's Law was named for a young girl named Lexi Weck who had autism and a number of other special needs. And under Lexi's Law, again, corporations can make donations to scholarship organizations. That money is used specifically for students with special needs or students in the foster care system. So as you can see, all three of the programs in Arizona have unique features to them that makes them a vehicle that's for families that wouldn't otherwise, right, be making these choices for their children. I know this table is a little small, and so I'll kind of read some of these numbers to you, but this is a snapshot of what tax credit scholarships looked like in Arizona last year. There are 57 scholarship organizations in Arizona. Actually, today there are about 60 of these organizations now. These organizations, in many cases, have relationships with local private schools because the scholarship organizations must award scholarships to more than one private school. So there will be a network among Catholic schools, for example, or among Lutheran schools in the state, and the families will know what scholarship organization to go to when they want to decide between either the private schools that are around them or private schools that, say, have a college preparatory mission or even a secular mission, right, or have a non-religious mission. They have a number of the scholarship organizations to choose from. The total number of contributions collected last year was $71.4 million. Since the scholarships became law in Arizona in 1997, so over the whole lifetime of the programs, we're close to about 600 million in scholarships that have been awarded. And the contributions obviously are slightly more than that because the scholarship organizations can retain a small portion of the donations to use for administrative expenses. The total number of scholarships awarded last year was about $58 million. In Arizona today, there are approximately 40,000 scholarships that were awarded last year. Arizona is one of the largest scholarship programs in the country. Florida's has approximately 60,000, so it's slightly larger, as is Pennsylvania's is also a little larger than Arizona's program. Like I was saying, the number of scholarships awarded at the time that the paper was written was about 30,000. Today it's about 40,000. What's interesting about the average scholarship award amounts And I think this is a critical feature of the debate about what the value of school choice is. The average scholarship award for the corporate program and for the individual program is about $2,000. Right? That's how much a scholarship on average is worth in Arizona. The average per student expenditures in the state of Arizona are $9,000. Now, like many states, Arizona tries to equalize funding between districts, but it's never perfect, right? It's never exact. And it turns out that in Arizona, in our districts that earned a D or F on the state report card, on the state report card system, we spend on average $13,000 a year on our lowest performing schools. So we spend $4,000 more on average on our lowest performing public schools than we do in other schools around the state. Whereas here, with this scholarship tax credit program, the scholarships on average are about $2,000. As I'll explain in a minute on the next slide, the students overwhelmingly that are using these programs are students that are from low-income areas. And these would not be students that would have access to the A-rated public schools in Arizona. These would be students that would, in many cases, right, they would have choices between a D school on one side or another D school on the other side. So it's a critical thing to remember, right, that we have found something that gives kids great access to better opportunities at a significant discount to what we're spending on public schools in the state. These last few numbers talk about the number of private schools receiving scholarship students. It's in the hundreds. Obviously, Lexi's Law is smaller because it is the smallest program in the state. There are 218, as of this year, 218 students using Lexi's Law, and the tuition amounts for those schools tend to be a little bit higher. And so for the donations that are collected, it obviously can't be spread as far over as many students. So what do we know, right? The scholarship program in Arizona is almost 17 years old, just about, right? So what do we know about the scholarships? Well, we know for one that the recipient's median income, and this is speaking of the individual program, which is the largest of the three programs, the recipient's median income was $5,000 below the Census Bureau's statewide median income level, right? So we are, in fact, with these programs, even though it's available to students already in private school, we are helping families that wouldn't otherwise be sending their child to a local private school. Murray is referring to Vicki Murray, who was one of my predecessors at the Institute. And a number of years ago, she did this study for Harvard, looking at who was using Arizona scholarships. She also found that in terms of where they were in their neighborhoods, right, these were kids using the scholarships, again, that wouldn't otherwise be choosing a private school. This last item is going to lead into some of the policy recommendations that I would offer for designing a program like this. 93% of the private schools in Arizona reported offering some kind of national norm reference test to their students already. There's a big debate in education right now between the Common Core and what's happening with standardized testing among states. And as No Child Left Behind has this kind of on-again, off-again relationship with Congress and deciding what to do with it, I think it's important to remember that private schools are already using an instrument to measure their students. And so when I go into the recommendations, this will be important when we talk about what it means for good policy in terms of making sure that tax credit scholarship programs are transparent. So when designing a scholarship tax credit law based on what we've learned in Arizona, what do we need to do, right? What should it look like? Well, for starters, we need to think in terms of eligibility. And I think that with a school choice program, you are only creating another level of, another tiered system if you limit the eligibility only to certain students. So I think it's important to remember that, you know, when we talk about school choice, no one is compelled to do anything, right? Donors are not compelled to give to scholarship organizations. No one's going to force them to do it. No one is going to force a parent to choose a private school or to go and seek a scholarship, right? No one's going to force them to do that. This is all by the choice of the parent and the parent determining what their child's needs are. So having said all of that, I think it's critical that every child should have the opportunity, at least have the freedom to participate. Secondly, the tax credit amounts. The amounts of the credits are, in effect, the limiting provisions on tax credit scholarships, right? Because if you have a limit on how much you can either collect or award, right, that will determine how many scholarships you can be awarded in the state. So in Arizona, like I was saying, the individual credits are capped based on how much individuals can contribute. In terms of the corporate credits, they're capped based on the total credit awards that can be given to businesses, and it actually increases over time. I think right now we're somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 million that can be given to businesses in tax credits based on their contributions. So those will be the limiting factors. So it's important that they be dollar for dollar tax credit awards, because I think that will be the best way to build a robust system. Third is academic transparency. And again, this is the sticky issue, right? This is the one where I think you can very quickly go down the wrong path, and you can wind up with a program that not only limits what students can learn and where they can go, but also what the private schools, right? What private entities can teach and can do. And so I think what we've learned in Arizona is that the single biggest criticism of Arizona's program, and the one that we hear every single year. In fact, I have 7 pages of quotes just from the past 2 years about school choice in Arizona from the media and from opponents to parental choice, saying that we still don't know how well students are doing in the program. And they will claim and they will say, because we don't know, we shouldn't keep this program around. And so what I would urge is a set of transparency provisions where you would have the schools, which again are already offering national norm reference tests, they already have ways to measure how their children are doing, and have that data outsourced to a private researcher who then conducts a study based on student achievement and using the results. And I think that you can structure this in such a way that it does not restrict what the private schools are teaching, because again, they're already doing this, right? And it's to their benefit, because if the private schools can show how well they're doing and how well they're teaching their students, they obviously then can use that, right, as a marketing tool, right? They can use that to show how successful they are. And I can't emphasize this enough. A couple of years ago, Arizona's program came under considerable criticism for some of the ways that the scholarships were being awarded. And after that criticism piled up, and they had a legislative commission that was appointed to review the tax credit program. What resulted was more regulations on the scholarship organizations. In fact, a number of the STOs closed after those news reports came out. Now, I think that one of the significant weaknesses in the whole debate was that we could not stand up and say, well, look, I see that there are bad actors, so let's clean that up. But we have excellent academic results, so it's critical that we keep this program around. But frankly, the results weren't there. Okay, so we can say, as I was, a couple of slides ago, that the program has met a need among students that wouldn't otherwise be attending a private school and giving them choices. The fact is that these academic results are very important, and that we can structure these provisions so that they don't interfere with what a private school is doing. Fiscal transparency is equally as important. The data in my report and the data in other things that I've written on the tax credit program comes from a report that the Arizona Department of Revenue puts out every year. And it's a very thorough report that goes through all of the schools that receive students using scholarships and how much money is collected. And it goes all the way back to the beginning of the program. So this is very useful to not only lawmakers and agencies, but also folks that want to know more about what Arizona's program has accomplished. So I think providing that fiscal transparency is very important. Finally, is the issue of swapping, and this was one of the things that happened in Arizona that fortunately we've mostly resolved in the state. But oftentimes there were cases where individuals would go to a scholarship organization and say, "Okay, here is my donation, and I want it to go to this student." And there are actually federal tax laws that are in play here, so it's very important that that the law be structured to prevent swapping and prevent this kind of behavior. I think what Arizona and Florida and New Hampshire and Pennsylvania and Georgia and all of the other states that have these tax credit scholarship programs have shown overall, the lessons that we've learned are that, one, they have met a need, right? There are some 40,000 kids in Arizona or 40,000 scholarships that were awarded, right? We know that parents want this and will take advantage of it. I think secondly, we know that we are spending considerably more per child in the public education system than we do through a school choice program, right? So this is a way to provide parents with more access and students with more choices, right, at a significant savings. And so with that, happy to take any questions.
My question is actually for you. I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name, John. At the very beginning of your presentation, you had a photograph of a young man who has made he's had considerable movement from where he would have been to where he is now. I'm curious to know, has there been any sort of a study to look at the students who have gone through these various programs throughout the United States and where they have wound up? Have they made societal progress in the same way as this young man as compared to the groups that they came from, and that group of students would have gone to those particular schools and the societal progress that they've made?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think some of the most interesting studies really come out of Florida. Florida's tax credit scholarship program is also one of the older programs. A fellow named David Figlio does the reports on that program and has found improved student achievement among the scholarship participants. There is another voucher program, which is slightly different, right, than a tax credit scholarship in Florida as well. And a study of that program showed a benefit for the public school students that in the public schools that the students leaving for the voucher had attended. In terms of things like college persistence and employment and things like that, I am not familiar with any tax credit scholarship studies. There's a study of charter school achievement in Florida that shows better college persistence among some of the charter school students there. But that's one of the longitudinal ones.
Yeah, there haven't been many studies of scholarship tax credit programs. I think a part of the reason is that there's been so much focus on the voucher programs. Because with a voucher program, you can do what's called a randomized controlled trial. It's the gold standard of social science research. So it's sort of like a medical trial. Right? I want to find the effect of a drug, and so I'm going to take a group of people, randomly divide them into two groups. I'm going to give one a placebo. I'm going to give one the treatment, and then I'm going to compare the outcomes from the two groups, and then whatever difference in those two groups is because of the treatment, because they were randomly divided. It's hard to do that with a scholarship tax credit program because in most states you have multiple scholarship organizations. You would have to have, it would be very difficult to do, put it that way. But with a voucher program, it's usually easier to do because all you have to do is get the government to agree. And when they're distributing the vouchers, if there is oversubscription, then they would give it out based on a lottery. And so you would be comparing a group of people that applied for a voucher and got a voucher versus the group that applied for the voucher and did not receive the voucher, as opposed to simply comparing public versus private, because there may be some intangible qualities about people who would seek out a private school education that doesn't, you'd be comparing apples and oranges. So here you're actually comparing apples to apples. So there have been 12. There have been 12 randomized controlled trials in voucher programs, where the treatment is the same as, the treatment being getting a scholarship to go to the school of your choice is the same as a scholarship tax credit program, although the mechanism is different. So from a constitutional point of view and from a policy point of view, it's different. In terms of the actual treatment, so to speak, itself, it's the same. So you can make some comparisons there. 11 of the 12 randomized controlled trials found that a positive effect on the voucher students. So higher test scores, higher rates of college, of high school graduation, of college matriculation. Effect sizes vary from program to program. Often they were quite modest, but the final study found no statistically significant difference, and none of them found a negative impact. So is it, these programs are all quite small. Are they changing the world radically? No, not yet, at least statistically. But
they are for the students.
They are for the, but
They
I
are
was
for
going to
the
say, but
families.
for individual families, they can make absolutely a very huge difference.
Thank you. My question is sort of at the other end of the spectrum from Gabe. My wife has a little autistic boy, 7-year-old, in her class. And I was explaining to Mrs. Talent at the last Show Me Institute that Alan refused to do his work, and my wife said, well, you need to do this work. And he said, I'm going to kill myself, and got up, ran across the room, and started pounding his head against the wall. And then before my wife could get there, went screaming down the hallway saying, I'm going to kill myself, I'm going to kill myself. My wife got one of the aides there who has an autistic child, and they rocked and cradled the young man for about a half an hour until he finally calmed down. My problem is with all of these schools, whether they're charter schools or scholarship schools or whatever, they don't take those kids. Okay, those kids, along with the other kids that come from dysfunctional families. Last year I was on the school board in Ferguson, Florissant. We had 3 fourth graders pregnant. Okay, you don't take those kids. You don't take the kids coming out of juvenile detention. You don't take the kids that are being abused at home. Therefore, whatever measurement that you're using to measure these kids, it doesn't apply. And that's my problem. I don't disagree with working out something where there are schools where you can get to a safe feeling, but you can never compare what's being done in the public schools with what's being done in the private schools. So my question really is this. You talked about transparency. In California, what they do is with their charter schools, they have 1,100 charter schools, but they keep track of whether or not those charter schools match the schools in the neighborhood, and they certify those schools that do. And when I say matched, I'm talking about demographics, the number of handicapped kids, the number of disabled, whatever, free lunch. And in California, those 1,100 charter schools, there's only 33 that they certify. So my problem is, why should we be spending money for schools that simply don't take all the kids?
Well, I'd say first that Arizona has one of the nation's most flexible open enrollment laws, where you can pick any public school in the state of Arizona to go to. Now, here's the thing. They don't take every child that applies. In fact, if they decide, and they can decide on their own if they're full, they won't take a child that wants to come. So public schools don't take every child that applies. And then secondly, in Arizona, we have private schools specific for students with special needs, and hence Lexi's Law, right? I mean, these are schools that have a mission to help students that otherwise wouldn't be served in the public system. Third, in Arizona for many years, public schools do what's called private placements. If they decide that they cannot serve a child's needs, they'll send the child to a private school, and they'll pay the cost out of taxpayer money, aside from the tax credit scholarship program or education savings accounts. So, again, I think that there are ways to show, right, that, no one school, whether it's private or public, right, can be all things to every family. So hence the need for tax credit scholarships, and in the case of Arizona, education savings accounts, right? I mean, I think tax credit scholarships are really just the next step to what is really a larger frontier for families. I think New Hampshire's program is very unique. I mean, I think, don't miss, right, what Jason was saying about how homeschool families, right, can use the scholarship money for a variety of expenses. Well, in Arizona, we have what are called education savings accounts, and with these accounts, public money is put in private bank accounts that parents can use for a variety of educational products and services. And it was first made available to families with special needs, right? And they can use the accounts to buy tutoring, education therapy, as well as pay private school tuition. And the whole reason, right, that this law was enacted, the whole reason that we have these programs is because parents wanted it, right? They demanded better access because they weren't getting it in the public school system.
Question follows up on the previous gentleman. The current system of education that we use in this country for, at least K-8 especially, is sorting by birth year. And there are many students for whom sorting by birth year works, but not all children intellectually mature at the same rates. Now, my son is a student for whom sorting by birth year just did not work. In math and science, he was way above grade level. He was also dyslexic, so the regular curriculum was just not going to be useful for him. And I eventually just got to the point, it was either let this system destroy him or put him in a private school. And I was paying at one point $24,000 a year for middle school so that he could have individualized, instruction that was appropriate. And all this business about, well, a good teacher can take a class of 30 students and individualize instruction for everybody. I'm sorry, that's just I don't think that's realistic. Why aren't these set up so that it can pay the full tuition? Because for a lot of families, $5,000 towards $24,000, it may as well be zero, because a lot of these families can't afford, that difference between the full price of the tuition and what this credit provides. Thank you.
So first, to address your remarks, I completely agree with you. We have a system that was designed essentially for the industrial era to produce good factory workers that will reliably show up on time and perform menial tasks. And we had a system of education that worked well for us for a long time, but in the 21st century, I don't think it makes sense to assume that all children born in the same year should be progressing in all subjects at the same rate at the same time. You may have a student who in 5th grade is reading on an 8th grade level, but their math is on what's called a 3rd grade level. And so to say that they have to, nope, they're behind, they have to be going at the same rate as everybody else, I think just simply doesn't make sense. Different students progress in different subjects at different rates. And I think that's part of what school choice is about, and more importantly, what educational choice is about. When Jonathan talked about education savings accounts, or New Hampshire allowing using the money for other different purposes, I think going forward in the future, we're going to be moving, hopefully, in a direction of greater tailoring of education to meet the individual needs of individual children. Now, to address your question directly about financing, yeah, I think that it is important to have these programs in some cases spend more. In New Hampshire, for example, the average maximum amount for a scholarship is $2,500. Now, some students got more, some students got less. In fact, on average, it ended up being about $1,000 in the first year, compared with a per pupil expenditure on average of $15,000 at the public school. But parents can usually make up the difference, and the private schools themselves generally find ways of reducing tuition for families that can't afford it. While I think that right now the programs are, or I know that the programs are expanding opportunities for thousands of students, actually 150,000 students participating in scholarship tax credit programs across the country. But I think you are right. I think there are ways that the programs can still be fiscally responsible and even in most cases save money for the states while at the same time providing a little more assistance so we can help even more students.
I mean, I think you asked directly why don't the programs pay the full cost of tuition. I can tell you in Arizona, and I would probably guess most states around the country, it's the teachers union and the school board association, right? They'll sue. That's what they do. They sued everything in Arizona. They sued basically everything in Florida. They try to shut them down. In Arizona, I think to deal with the cost of tuition, there are a couple of things. So one, to recognize that under Lexi's law, the average scholarship awards are actually higher. And there is one STO in particular that has an average scholarship award of about $13,000. So it's, they can, make larger scholarship awards to help families, meet the full cost of tuition. A quick, word about education savings accounts. Again, under the education savings accounts, which again are separate from the scholarship tax credits, students get 90% of what was set aside for them in the public school system. So if you have a child, say, that is on the autism spectrum, they have a weighted funding formula in Arizona, and the state would usually set aside somewhere around $20,000 for that child. So under an education savings account, they would get 90% of that, which puts you somewhere between the $15,000 and $20,000 range, right? And even for a school that has a high tuition number, that does get parents very, very close to paying the full cost. So it doesn't work in every case, but I think under Lexi's law and ESAs, there is significant flexibility and assistance to families that are looking to pay for the higher cost of tuition.
Yes, I have two quick questions. One for New Hampshire. You said 90% are in the would qualify for the school lunch program. Is that a factor of self-selecting, or is that a design criteria in the awards?
So the law required that students had to be from families that earned up to 300%, although 40% was set aside for students that were low income, according to the federal school lunch program. But the scholarship organization itself, like most scholarship organizations around the country, decided to prioritize need. And so they first gave scholarships to those students who were low income, and then gave scholarships to students who were below 300 but above the federal school lunch cutoff.
Okay, thank you. And John, like you were saying, and it's only obvious, obviously, concerned parents from D and F students would want another opportunity for their students. Do you get people complaining that, okay, you're taking the good kids from the bad schools and making it worse, or how does that work? Or
Yeah, well, I think one of the studies that we were referring to earlier about Florida's McKay Scholarship Program, that's the voucher program in Florida, actually looked at how the kids in the public schools did when students left to take a voucher in Florida. And they found that those public school students actually saw positive benefits. The public schools had more resources to use, right, with students leaving, and they were able to focus their attention on the students that had needs. We don't have a similar study that was conducted in Arizona, on that topic. I mean, I think what you do see, in particular with the students that are behind and with the students that have, that are not on the same level as their peers, if they have the opportunity to take a scholarship, I hope what we are headed towards is a day when public schools can, in fact, focus their resources on the students that they have, right, and provide better teaching and learning for the kids that are there. So,
actually, in Florida, the Dr. Figlio study, you can Google for this. Dr. Figlio, I think it was published in Education Next. It's, I think, the effects of competition, and it was the study in Florida on the scholarship tax credit program in Florida, and found that the public schools that were most subject to competition as a result of the program had the greatest improvement in public school performance. So it was small, it was a modest effect size, but a positive effect, which is encouraging.
What percentage of the schools that are accepting scholarship students are religious schools as opposed to non-sectarian? And I guess in Arizona, how has that changed over time?
You know, I would have to look at the Department of Revenue study. I don't know offhand. I know that there is a mix. I mean, I think one of the things that just by looking at the number of scholarship organizations and what their missions are, you know, you can tell that not all of them are have a mission to send students to a religious school. I mean, some of them are looking for, you know, either non-sectarian schools or college prep schools or something like that. So I could find those numbers for you. People have to go look.
And in New Hampshire right now it's 0 because of the lawsuit. So all of the students are going to non-sectarian schools. None of them are going to religious schools at present.
Howard, we need to make these the last 2 questions, I think.
And actually, I would just add, just real quick, I mean, so because we have the 3 different scholarship programs, I know that 38 schools are serving students under Lexi's Law, which was the program for students with special needs. And by and large, those are not religious schools. You know, by and large, those are schools that are designed to help, you know, students with autism, students with Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, things like that. So we know there is at least a segment, right, that has a, you know, a different mission than religious instruction.
Good morning. I'm Bill Monroe, and I happen to be a member of the St. Louis Public Schools, the elected board, the board with no power. And frankly, I'm disappointed in looking in this room and seeing a lack of people of color. And I say that we should have this room crowded because this is what this is about, and this is what you guys are talking about primarily. I'm also I believe in choice. And I have a question to this, but I was also the founder of a charter school here in St. Louis called Thurgood Marshall. And I would say that Thurgood Marshall was assassinated by the very charter school management company that I hired to help me, called Imagine. And they killed me, and they were eventually thrown out of St. Louis. And no one would listen to me as to what I was going through as a founder. But I ask you, my question is, how do you deal or have you dealt with the predatory management companies that are out here that primarily seek for profit? And how does poor people navigate that issue of financing to put a school in our community?
Well, I'm a school board member for a charter school in Arizona, and so also, you know what it feels like to have those monthly meetings. You know, I would say the charter school movement, you know, it has different features, I think, than than what some of the private school choice that we're talking about. I mean, I would say what's happening in charter schools is a couple of things. I think for one, the states that have had charter school laws for many years, they're starting to look more and more like traditional public schools because of by and large, the federal requirements that are being imposed. I mean, I think things under not just No Child Left Behind, but Race to the Top and things like that are changing the ways that charter schools have to do business. So I think that's one thing that charters are facing. I think in terms of charter management organizations, you know, I wouldn't say that just because an organization is for profit that they're necessarily out for ill, right? That they're out to cause trouble. I mean, I think I don't know that that's an immediate sign, right? That there's a problem. I think the problem may come when they're trying to restrict the different types of charter schools that we can have in states, right? Because I think that when charter school laws were passed, they were designed to provide better options and high quality education. I mean, in brief, right? And so I think it's that first one. It's the more options that I think that the charter movement is struggling with right now. And I think what we're gonna have to figure out is a better way to hold charter schools accountable that doesn't interfere with how they teach. And because I think things like the Common Core in particular are going to force charter schools into a box, and even more so than they are now. And so I think preserving charter schools' independence really needs to be the goal for the next 20 years in the charter school movement.
This is really for both of you, and it kind of piggybacks on the last question a little bit. we're currently transporting students in our area from unaccredited school districts to accredited school districts and getting a better education, I think, by doing so. For example, Francis Howell School District in St. Charles County is accepting schools from the Normandy School District in St. Louis County, an unaccredited district. And from what I understand, Francis Howell's cost per student is somewhere in the neighborhood of $9,000 annually, and their incremental cost for accepting these students from an unaccredited school district is only in the neighborhood of $500 because their administrative and buildings and so forth are there already, and they're putting a few more students in classrooms, so the incremental costs are very nominal. And it seems to me like in some cases, if you were monitoring it, that you could get these schools to accept your scholarship money perhaps as full tuition. But so I'm interested in how you keep people from taking advantage of this, of a larger tuition that some schools may tend to want to charge that don't really need to. But secondly, and beyond all of this, have any of these programs been in effect long enough to find out if the need for this type of program is being reduced by the program? Is the school district becoming a better place by employing this type of transfer of students?
So unfortunately, there's not a lot of research besides the one I mentioned from Florida on the impact on public schools, and even that was only over the course of a few years, so we don't really have any longitudinal studies to show what the impact is, although I think there are some underway, so hopefully we will have more data in the future. John, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, in terms of the cost of private schools, I would say that, one of the weaknesses of, if you can call it a weakness of voucher programs, and less so with tax credit scholarships, is that with voucher programs, usually the amount of the voucher is set at a particular amount. So take Wisconsin, Milwaukee, right, for example, they've had a voucher program for a long, long time. And when they set, right, where the voucher was going to be, oftentimes the private schools looked at that, and that's where they set their tuition, right? I think with tax credit scholarships, I think that's alleviated a little bit because oftentimes there is either no limit on the size of a scholarship award, or the scholarships can be combined. You can get more than one. So there isn't a number, right, that private schools have to look to set their amount. I would say that under the Education Savings Account program in Arizona, I was explaining that program before. What happens there is that the money is put into a parent's account and they can use it for multiple expenses. And so it gives the parents the incentive to find a quality education and save if they can, or use it for in multiple ways. So I think that helps prevent private schools from just kind of picking a number, right, and setting it wherever the school choice program needs to be. In terms of have districts done better, or have tax credits solved the problem? Well, no. I can tell you why. One, the eligibility is restricted by and large, right? It's either restricted on who can participate, or it's restricted based on how much money people can give. So the more that we limit school choice programs, the less effective they can be. I mean, right, for years, right, people have they point fingers at the public school system and they say, oh, it's a monopoly, right, and we need to just break this monopoly. Well, it's not really true, because it's not a perfect market, right? And it's not a perfect market because it doesn't function exactly the way that it does when you buy a car necessarily. It's close, right? There are similarities. But one of the big differences, right, is that there are significant restrictions on what can happen outside of that, right, outside of the public school system. In particular, the limits placed on choices that parents can make. So, back to your question. So why has it not solved the problem? It's too small, right? It's been limited. As long as every time we go to pass a school choice program, right, around the country, we will fight these battles with the, take your pick, right, ACLU, teachers union, what have you, right? As long as we've got to do that, we will march state to state We'll win the battle like we did in Arizona, like they did in Florida, like they've done elsewhere, right? We'll win the battle, and then you'll spend the next 5 to 10 years growing the program. So, that's what we're faced with in the school choice movement, right? And I think to the gentleman's point over here, there needs to be a significant marketing effort to families, wherever they are, right? To tell them that you have opportunities, right? You have choices. Or if you don't, your neighboring state does. And you need to go and tell your lawmaker that you want what they've got over there. And we have to let people know. And I think what we've seen in the school choice programs that we've got, that it does meet a need, right? Parents want it. They take advantage of it.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to have a short break and then come back.